Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast, where we discuss natural solutions to today's worst health problems. I'm Dr. Kevin Linderman, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Rob DeMartino out of Vegas. Doc, this is number 28 today.
28, we're rolling.
We are rolling. It's hard to believe we've done that many podcasts. They just seem to roll by so quickly. And I really think the subject that we're going to cover today is so important for the women out there listening. And the topic that we're going to cover affects approximately 200 million women worldwide. And it's one of the most misunderstood, mismanaged, and dismissed conditions in all of medicine, really. It's endometriosis.
Yeah, it's amazing. And maybe this is the perspective as guys, like we don't realize just how many women deal with this, right? And how many people that you come into contact with and of really varied ages, right? Like you see really young people dealing with this problem now, right? It's not always that it's become a problem that's so pervasive that is so misunderstood, like you said, and they feel so dismissed. And again, from ultimately at the end of the perspective of everything we talk about is how do you help some of these problems, right? They feel lost, right? There's no answers. There's no answers medically. And I mean, I sat with somebody not too long ago, 9 surgeries.
Yeah.
9 on it. I mean, and again, she's like, I don't know what else to do. And then it's funny because then when we went over some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today with her, she's like, I brought this up to my doctor and he literally told me that was conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I hear the same thing.
Conspiracy theory. Like, was this the internet?
Right. No, it's science. It's pretty much just science. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about, right, exactly. We're going to talk about what endometriosis actually is, why it is fundamentally an autoimmune disease, and then also why conventional treatment fails for this so often. And you know, they did one study that was published this year in Nature. They followed 332,000 women, and they found that women that have endometriosis have twice the odds of developing an autoimmune disease. And I know me and Dr. Rob are like, well, yeah, duh. I mean, obviously, it's one of those situations, Doc, to where we've been talking about something for 10 or 12 years and they spend $20 million on a study and now they're the smart ones. You know, that happens to us all the time.
That happens quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens quite a bit. Actually, and when they break down the numbers, it's like you have a 14% greater chance of getting one autoimmune disease, a 21% greater chance of getting 2 autoimmune disease, a 30% greater chance of getting 3 or more autoimmune diseases, and overall, like a 50% increase and basically a double chance of getting an autoimmune disease. And even though technically endometriosis doesn't classify as an autoimmune disease, it basically is, right? Because the same things that drive autoimmune diseases, the same causations that you find in autoimmune diseases, we find in endometriosis. It creates all the scar tissue probleming. And it's funny now because they'll still say, well, it's not an autoimmune disease. But where are all of the new treatments that they're looking for? They're all looking at, hey, can we use autoimmune disease treatments and fit it into for endometriosis, right? So they're not willing to classify it as that because, again, at the end of the day, they want to have that antibody that they can smell, touch, taste, and feel, but they ignore mechanism, right? And again, it takes a little bit of scientific understanding, but you look at what they do, they're like, oh, now we're going to treat it like an autoimmune disease, but it's not an autoimmune disease.
Yeah, and for our listeners, there are several conditions out there that Dr. Rob talks about have an autoimmune component to them, even though they're not listed as an autoimmune disease, but they basically are, like endometriosis and psoriasis and fibromyalgia and those kind of conditions, because the mechanism is really exactly the same, like he was saying. And so let's first talk about the medical definition of endometriosis, like, you know, from their perspective, kind of what that is, and then we will dive into all the aspects of how we look at it.
Yeah, so they're going to talk about it basically as an inflammatory condition of the pelvis, right? Their conversation does not escape the pelvis. It's just a pelvic issue. There's no systemic issue going on here. It's just inflammation that creates scar tissue, right? And that scar tissue basically glues everything together. and it starts pulling on relevant anatomy. It can get so severe. It can, obviously it'll start causing some strangulation of reproductive organs, but it can actually start causing problem with other organs in your abdomen as well. But it will create things down the lines to severe like infertility, right? Women are unable to get pregnant because with all of this scar tissue built up on their reproductive organs, they don't function properly, right? But
Yeah.
they don't get outside of the pelvis,
Right.
right? It's all they talk about. So basically, they come down to this is scarring. We don't know why it happens. We're going to do surgery to remove the scar tissue.
Yeah.
Right. That's the conversation in a nutshell, which is a weird conversation because obviously, if you do surgery to remove scar tissue, by the nature of the surgical, what are you going to get?
More scar tissue.
More scar tissue, right? So
Right.
it's how you end up with these multiples. And again, you may get a moment of reprieve of feeling a little bit better as the scar tissue is broken up. But the thing is that this scar tissue is being generated by something, right? And that's what we want to talk about today is what generates that scar tissue. Because if you can handle that perspective of it, then all of a sudden now you start getting a little bit more to the deeper levels of things.
Yeah, and I saw one study published in the Lancet. They did this big study and they found inflammatory markers in endometriosis like interleukin 1 and interleukin 6. So we boiled it back down to, well, it's inflammation. And like we've talked about multiple times, that is not an answer. Inflammation is not all it is. Now, Doc, correct me if I'm wrong on the way I had pictured what happens in the body with endometriosis, because the way I always pictured it, and I might be wrong on this, but in the female reproductive system, every month the uterus sheds and then it grows back. That's what menstruation is. Mm-hmm. And those regrowing endometrial cells that are supposed to be making a new uterus every month have drifted off up through the fallopian tube somewhere and have attached themselves to other parts of the body. And instead of growing a uterus, now they're growing in other parts of the body, and the immune system is not able to get rid of those cells. Is that basically right?
Yeah, you start to get infiltration of cells that they're not programmed correctly. So they don't work the way that they're supposed to, right? They don't know where they're supposed to be. They're not going to work the way that they're supposed to. And then eventually what you're going to start to get is tissue that starts to get thickened, right? So the most important thing, and this is fascinating because reproductive tissue, and this goes for men and women, but especially for women, reproductive tissue, they're now saying pound for pound has more mitochondria in it, the little parts of your cells that make energy. Pound for pound, your reproductive tissue looks like it has more than any other part of your body, right? So we always talk about that your heart, your heart has a tremendous amount, your brain has a tremendous amount. But I mean, when you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, think about what reproductive tissue, especially in women, has to do, right? You have to build another entire human being from scratch, right? So that's going to take some power. That's going to take some juice to have to do. So there's a tremendous amount of mitochondrial capacity there. But beyond just capacity, it is vitally important that their mitochondria work in the way that they are supposed to. And when I say in the way that they're supposed to, that their engines work so that they can make a maximum amount of energy, right? Because that tissue needs max amount of energy, right? So there's engines that will output energy. Some output a lot more energy, right? Like Formula One race cars, like obviously they put out a lot more energy than some old clunker, right? From the 80s. And it's really important that that tissue puts out the max amount. And one of the hallmark things that we see in endometrial tissue that ends up becoming with something like endometriosis diagnosis is that those mitochondria shift to an old-fashioned way of making energy, which is up to 95% inefficient. So we get mitochondrial damage to where now instead of getting maximum output of energy, we get minimum output of energy. Now that's the same type of change that you get in somebody who gets a cancer diagnosis. Right. But what do we get with that? You get rapidly proliferating, redividing cells that end up going in the wrong places. Same mechanism, just different outcome on the other side.
Yeah, and that's where you have either 36 ATP or 2 ATP, right? Where if the cell's dysfunctional, the mitochondria are dysfunctional, they can only make 2 ATP instead of 36. Well, the body's solution is that means we need, many more times the same amount of cells because we're only making 2 instead of 36.
Right. So in that hallmark, two's better than nothing, but now you're
Right.
going to need 18 times the amount. Right. So
Right.
think of it like miles per gallon in a car. Right. If I've got to go 36 miles, if I can fill up my tank once and get 36 miles per gallon, or if I have to stop every 2 miles and keep doing that, I'm going to have to stop 18 times.
Yeah.
Right. It's way more efficient the first way than the second
Right.
way.
Yeah.
But the funny part is, again, all of those inflammatory markers, all those cytokines that you were talking about before, where do those cytokines come from? That's, I think, probably the place where I get, well, one of the places I get the most annoyed. I get more annoyed with a lot of stuff in medical, but one of the places I get the most annoyed is that they reference that. Oh, it's
Mhm.
these inflammatory chemicals. They're always involved. Great. Where do they come from? Mitochondria, right? We know that. That's not my opinion, right? That's been,
Right.
they know that forever. So they
Yeah.
reference the fact that this inflammatory process is what's driving the problem. But then they completely blow off and overlook the fact of where we know where that inflammation comes from. And it comes from these mitochondria when they're not working correctly and you're making 2 ATP instead of 36,
Mhm.
right? Like, so it's ignoring it on the surface level and purely from the reason of we can chemically intervene to push those inflammatory markers down, but we can't chemically intervene to repair those mitochondria. So they're going to intervene where they can, which is just, again, trying to let the mitochondria not work the way that they're supposed to, but just clean up the inflammatory markers that they're sending out, which is part of the way that they fix themselves. But it's just, where do they enter the conversation in that grand spectrum of things? That's the part that irks me, because if you just take that next step forward, it sounds like almost like what we're saying is a stretch, but realistically, it's actually the most logical thing, not to mention the fact that there's all the science that backs it.
Yeah. It's like if the roof's leaking and instead of fixing the roof, you just keep mopping it up, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
You just
keep
patch it,
trying to,
patching,
yeah, just patching it up. Yeah.
patching it up, or, in this case, cutting pieces out and like trying to replace it. At some point, this is inflammatory. This is all. But again, when we talk about the autoimmune diseases, they get all of them, right? So if you get endometriosis, the chances of getting Hashimoto's are through the roof. The chances of getting multiple sclerosis go through the roof. The chances of getting lupus or rheumatoid, they all skyrocket, right? So this
Yeah.
gets out of the pelvis really quickly. The thing with all of these problems is what mitochondria and what cells are the ones having problems, right? So these ones are ones in your reproductive organs that are having the
Right.
problems. It's just, where does this problem lie? But it's still mitochondrial dysfunction. And once you get mitochondrial dysfunction in one place, well, it's very easy to get it in a second place. Now you get a different autoimmune diagnosis, right? And then that's why I said you get this 20% chance of getting 2, and you get this 30% chance of getting 3, because you're just building mitochondrial dysfunction in all these different parts of the system, building this inflammatory stuff. And all soft tissue needs 3 things to stay flexible. It needs oxygen, it needs ATP, which is the form of energy that mitochondria makes, and it needs hydration. And when you fail mitochondria in those spots, those soft tissues will not be soft and flexible and really pliable. They're going to get hard, they're going to get thick, they're going to get dense, and they're not going to move, and they're going to glue to everything else around them. And we call that scar tissue. Right? Scar tissue doesn't,
Absolutely.
in methodology, doesn't even really exist. Scar tissue is energy deficient tissue.
Wow.
Right? That's what
Yeah.
scar tissue is, right? We look at it now, that could build up and get real thick over the course of a long period of time. But if you re-energize that tissue, that scar tissue melts away like nothing.
Wow. That's really fascinating with all the mitochondrial science and how that's involved. And there's 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 nobody in the traditional field even looking at this.
No, no. Well, to be fair, like when you and I were in school, that they didn't teach us anything of this.
Right.
Right. Like, to
Right.
be fair, we had like maybe one course, like where they mentioned mitochondria, you talk about cell biology, right? They mention all these
Yeah.
different cycles of how to make ATP, and then they kind of blow that off really quickly. And you never think about it again. But, the medical field, we're not taught that. And from their methodology in that centralized medicine idea, there's just no tools in the toolbox to fix it. So despite the fact that, again, fact check me, go look everything up and all these different types of things. And you see all of this is very real. No one's going to talk to you about that if they don't have a methodology of fixing it, because it's not a good conversation. It's like, oh, this is what caused it. Like, well, that's great. I have it. And she's like, what do I do about it? Oh no, we don't have anything to do for it. Like, we're just going to, give you some anti-inflammatory stuff, and we're going to, cut you up, cut out the scar tissue. That's not a good conversation. So they're just like, well, we don't really know. Just inflammatory. This is what we can do. They're not going to have the conversation if they don't have something to do. So my hope within the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, and what I really think is going to happen is that they're going to start coming up with diagnostics to be able to read this more directly, right? So we can read these things more directly, so that if we can read it more directly and we can say, okay, that's exactly what it is, it takes away this mysticism of trying to find these patterns that we can't directly test, right? Like endometriosis would be a very different conversation if we had an antibody we could link to it. Right, like you said, there's no fibromyalgia factor in somebody's blood, right? But that exists in science, right? Like when somebody does an EKG, they're not looking at it and saying, "Oh, that marker's off. That means you have AFib." No, they're looking at the overall pattern of how your heart beats, and from that pattern, they're going to tell you what's wrong with your heart, right? There's no one marker on an EKG that tells you it's this. They look at the pattern of how it works. It's the same exact thing that we're doing, right? We're looking at the pattern of how your body reacts, and from there being able to say, okay, we know the science, we see the pattern, it means it's this. But I'm hoping that there'll be testing that we can say it's that, because that's easier for everybody to understand. Because otherwise then they get confused, how do you know that? Well, you have to know the science, well, you have to know the patterns, and you have to be able to read between the lines. But if you're just going to do this like it's a syndrome, you're going to get stuck on the next drug or wait for the next surgery and kind of shushed out the door, right? There's more work to our end.
Right. And that's where all the money in science is going is, what next medication can we give for this for sure. Now it can take 7 to 10 years for a woman to get an endometriosis diagnosis. And, I was thinking about this when I was prepping for the show. I had a 15-year-old in here last week that had endometriosis. That means she may have had this since she was 9 or 10. And it's just now getting to the point to where she's recognized that she has it. So, like you said earlier, this is starting younger and younger. Kids' bodies are getting more energetically in debt and more dysfunctional and having more and more chronic problems. And man, it was just a sad case because she should be in high school, living, having fun, and she's doubled over half the time, and so she may have actually started this in her single digits.
Yeah, it's like she should be ready for dances, like high school dances, not proms and stuff, not dealing with this sorts of nonsense.
Not pelvic surgeries and
and in the 20 something years of doing this together, even you just see them getting younger and younger with the problems, right?
Yeah.
And so they always want to run towards this hormonal thing, right? But again, she probably had that problem beforehand. But please understand, this is nothing to do with blame, right? It's just the way that we're made, right? But that's always when you have to look at mom, right? Because remember, we get 100% of our mitochondria from mom. 0% of that comes from dad, right? Dad's genetics play a role in what you'll look like. Dad's genetics will play a role in what disease you will get. Mom's mitochondrial genetics play a role in will you get a disease. So if the mitochondria don't damage, it doesn't matter where the detour takes you, right? Because there's going to be no path. But if those mitochondrial DNA damages, then it's going to matter what the genetics, how the body expresses that. And that's where mom and dad. So people are like, well, my mom doesn't I get this a lot, right? And I think it's an important topic, right? My mom doesn't have an autoimmune disease, but my dad's family side does. Okay, so that either means mom passed you poor mitochondrial genetics, and now you express them in the same way that your dad's family did, or it's not always mom's fault, right? Somebody said, well, there's no autoimmune disease on either side of my family. Why do I have autoimmune disease? Well, unfortunately, you can damage your mitochondria all by yourself, right? You could have inherited perfect DNA from mitochondrial DNA from mom, And then the lifestyle or the things that we've done in this life can damage them completely. And then you could start that cycle, right? So I'm not blaming all the moms saying this is 100% genetic. It always comes from that direction. But the majority of times, if somebody's that young, they don't have time to damage their mitochondria to that level, right? So they probably inherited some. And then usually if you ask mom's like, oh, I have Hashimoto's, or I have, another autoimmune, or I have psoriasis, or whatever it is. Oh, okay. So there's some mitochondrial dysfunction. And now her genetics and dad's genetics mixed together expresses it as endo.
Yeah, and the other thing that I was thinking about that too, whenever I was talking to her about that case is, and Doc, I know this happens to us on almost every single case we get. We are late in the game. Nobody comes to Dr. Rob or I and says, "Man, I've had this for 2 weeks. It just started. What do you think it is?" No, they've had it for 15 years. They've been to 7 specialists, 4 hospitals. They've traveled out of town. They've tried everything under the sun, and then they come to us.
Right.
And so by the time you get diagnosed with endometriosis and they go through the medical route and then they get to us, we are behind the ball. We're behind the 8 ball here. We're late in the game. And sometimes it takes a while to go back and kind of redo all that damage and repair all this stuff.
Yeah, what I always said, like, we're unfortunately the doctors of last resort. It's just
Right.
kind of how it works out, right? Nobody shows up here first. They always try everything else. And then it's here at the end. And it's like, hey, can you, kind of do something with this? I'm kind of out of options. And, it was part of our conversation too, of like, hey, we should maybe talk about this on the podcast, right? Like,
Yeah.
we talked about it that way. Obviously I've been a lot more vocal on social media. You've always been pretty vocal on social media. I was kind of always a little bit more laid back on that. I've started to do a lot more now, just purely because I would love to change that if we could. Because if we could
Yeah.
get our hands on these people earlier, oh my gosh, like the
Oh,
ease of
yeah.
fixing these things would be like
Right.
dramatic. Like,
Right.
people always sometimes ask me, like, what's your success rate? I'm like, it's pretty high. And considering the fact that I'm usually doing this at the end stage where, like, I'm the last guy on the list. If you went to me first, my rates would be higher. But like, you're asking me to do it with
Right.
like one hand tied behind my back to a certain extent, it's
Yeah.
still pretty darn good because the science is what it is. And I always say it, and I feel like Thanos here, like, the science is inevitable. Like, this is
Yeah.
inevitable, right? It's
Yeah.
going to come here, push or shove. And it's going to be kind of kicking and screaming against the centralized system because they don't really want that. That's not really
Yeah.
what it's designed to do. But, it's amazing how fast the body can break down. But if you do the right things and you do it in the right order, like I literally I was running like crazy this morning in clinic, and I had one of my patients this morning, and he's like an amazing patient. Like, the guy does absolutely everything I ask of him, like to the T. Comes in with a notepad, right? What do you want me to do this time? Like, okay, this is what I want to do. Great, I'll do that. And we're like 5 months in, and he was super candid with me when he came. He's like, I've abused my body my entire life. He's in his 50s, right? Abused my body my entire life. Now I've got multiple autoimmune diseases. Multiple doctors tell me I'm on the verge of dying. When I looked at his test work, I wasn't excited about how bad it was. And he's like, am I dying? I don't want to say those words, but it's not great. I sat with him this morning and he's like, I've never felt better in my life.
Yeah.
And and he's like, is this really possible? And I'm like, yeah, man, but like, also understand too, like, think about all the stuff that you've done. Right now, it's not crazy. Like, what he's doing is very natural, but no one would know to do that. But it was amazing how quickly he can turn things around, even despite the fact that he's like, all my friends are shocked that I'm even still alive, let alone now that I'm healthier and better than I've ever been. And all my doctors are confused why my lab work looks so good.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about these things and the only reason I reference his story is you talk about these problems that have been there for a long time. And yeah, that's not great. And we don't want to be behind the 8 ball. We don't want to push behind on all those things. But at the same time, if you do the right things with the right kind of leverage, your body only knows one thing, and that's to get better.
Right.
It's always fighting
Yeah.
for that. All the stuff that you see
Right.
happening is because it's not able to do that, and it's all compensations. Like, I would probably be on the fence of, I don't even know if disease exists. I think the body's just trying to constantly compensate for other issues.
Right.
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 And, I guess I always end up somehow into like a sermon on these things, like where I get like real motivational towards the end. I'm like, yeah, you can fix this. But, and of course, we want to get back to like the leptin biology. I think it's an important thing to cover before we end. But even though these things have been there for a long time, and maybe you've had 9 surgeries, right? Like that other gal that I talked to, I am still telling you that if you change the energy production and you change the quality of that tissue, everything changes overnight.
Yep.
Right? It starts
Yep.
healing almost immediately. It may take a threshold. I mean, think about how many mitochondria you have in your body, right? If you got 37 trillion cells, and on average, there's like 5,000 mitochondria per cell, you're in like the quintillions of numbers.
Yeah.
And you won't get these symptoms until you're 30, 50%, sometimes 70% damaged. So what's 70% of a quintillion? I don't even know what that math is. But that's what you have to repair, and you've got to get it past threshold before somebody actually starts getting better. So yeah, there is a time component because there's no magic wand that fixes those things. And all the stuff that we do to expedite that process, they're still healing. But all the body knows to do is to heal. They just need to get what they need to get.
Yeah. Did you mention leptin associated with
Yeah.
endometriosis? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
run through that.
Yeah, because I got off on a tangent there. I'm good for that. But
No, it's
yeah,
okay. We do
leptin's an
that. Yeah.
important thing. And I don't know which podcast leptin was. It's one of the five levers, obviously one of the five major levers. So leptin levels, the higher leptin levels get inside the human body, or the more leptin resistance you get, there will be a direct correlation with the production, creation, triggering, and thickness of endometriosis. Right? So leptin is a hormone that your body generates. And basically, its main job, they'll typically talk about it in metabolism and the ability to gain weight or lose weight. But leptin's job is to act as the middleman between your mitochondria and how much energy your body makes, and signaling back to your brain if you've made enough energy or if you haven't made enough energy and what needs to happen. So it's basically like your energy accountant. So leptin levels are massively important because it is virtually impossible to find somebody who has endometriosis who has a normally functioning leptin level.
Oh,
Now, if you go
okay.
back and you watch the Archimedes lever series that we did, leptin is completely tied to melatonin, your hormones of the dark, and vitamin D, your hormones of the light, and MSH, your hormones of being able to get tan. All of those guys play together. So yes, all of those other hormones are involved, but leptin is the one that there's main research on that will really dictate whether you get this problem. Right now, again, yeah, it goes back to mitochondrial stuff, but leptin is a major protector of mitochondria. Right? So if leptin levels are normal and melatonin levels are normal and vitamin D levels, your mitochondria are protected. And I've been very much on the vocal warpath of lately. I'm getting really annoyed at all of these docs, including functional, because on my job, I guess, is to piss everybody off. I pissed off the medical, I pissed off the function, I pissed off everybody. Is that they're always trying to make this about a chemical invader. Oh, it's this bacteria or it's this virus that's in your system, or it's parasites, or it's leaky gut. And I get the comments back from regular everyday people, and I know they're just telling me what their functional doctor said or whatever they heard on TikTok, and it's making me crazy because that steals your ability of having control, right? If you phrase it as and that's a very medical thing, right? It's going to be the same thing with peptides. You have this medical side where you say it's a chemical invader, which means then the natural thing is a chemical solution. But if you need a chemical solution from the outside, it makes you dependent and a customer forever. What we're talking about here, getting these hormones right and getting your mitochondria to work correctly and all of those things, that's how you play offense, because they want you playing defense. They want you thinking you're always under duress and you're always under attack, and you constantly have to play defense for the rest of your life. And you constantly have to take all the things that they tell you in order to play defense. Where our message is incredibly different, whereas I want you to know how to play offense. Because when you play offense and you're in control and you know how to make your body run the way that it's supposed to, just like I taught that guy how to do, now all of a sudden he is in control and he's like, so I just do this for the rest of my life and I'm good, right? Yep. Never see me again. Awesome. He's like, can we still hang out sometimes? Sure. You want to come and have lunch? Let's do it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
enjoy our conversations every time we meet, right? I was like, we can have,
Yeah.
but the reality is it's that. And I think that's always been my message of they want to put this always on outside things. No, this is an inside thing, right? You need outside things, but those things aren't chemicals like what they're talking about, right? You need sunlight, you need darkness. It's why we did this whole series on all of these things. Within this, if you watched all of this and pieced together the stuff that we would say to do, there's the road out. And it's all of these diseases, right? And we've talked about it before, but it's the stuff that gets you better is the stuff that keeps you better. because it's the stuff that the way you're supposed to work, right? So giving the body what it needs. And in endometriosis, right, again, infertilities, one of my very best friends, she told me, she was in her 40s and she's like, I got really severe endometriosis. I just want to handle the pain. And I told her, like, look, you got to be careful here, right? If we do this, you break up the scar tissue, which can be done really quickly. You got to be careful because, right, if you guys don't want to have kids, and she didn't believe me, and she's got a 6.5-year-old now.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Right. We're the same age, right? So it's one of those things that scar tissue can be broken down. Believe me, professional athletes have had access to this technology that breaks down scar tissue for a very, very long time. It's the same thing, right? But that's how they get back out there because they're getting paid millions of dollars and they got to get their butts out on the field or the court or whatever. It's the same concept, but we can use that same scar tissue ideology on the abdomen where people feel better, they get better. But if you can get to the root cause underneath the surface, and again, that root cause thing always comes up. But I'm telling you, if you trace the science back to the stuff that we talk about, it's there.
What an awesome way to close out the podcast. Listen, if you guys want to go back and watch some of this science that we're referencing to, you can start at podcast 15 and go to 22. Those podcasts were dedicated to all of these scientific things like leptin and MSH and all of these hormones and all these building blocks of health that Dr. Rob and I were referring to. Those podcasts go from 15 to number 22. Doc, the last thing I'd like to say is I love your concept of going on the offense. People feel like they're just trying constantly at a state of defense to try to defend against some kind of a disease. Our goal is to teach you how to go on the offense so that you can solve your health, so that you can have a long, healthy, functional life. All right. Number 28 is in the can.
In the books. I love it.
It's in the books. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.